Welcome to the 91 Untold Change Project. I'm Neil Armand. I'm your host for today. We're actually in the offices of NCVO today in London with our guest Sophie Livingston. The reason we've asked Sophie to be part of the Change Project is that as Chief Exec of Trustees Unlimited, I think she's got this really quite interesting helicopter view of the whole charity sector, while simultaneously having this quite interesting dynamic that Trustees Unlimited is a company rather than a charity. So that, I think, is something quite interesting for us to look at. And I personally know Sophie best from her 8 years at City Year UK, where she was the chief exec and grew it from a startup nothing to being one of the most successful youth charities in the UK, and it's been a pleasure to work alongside you for some of that time. Welcome to the 91 Untold Change Project.
The whole universe is in a state of entropy.
If you can unlock that higher motivation, they'll be with you.
How do you create an environment where people can find meaning at work?
That can create the needed culture change.
How does radical change happen?
You know it's a good business.
In terms of our evolution, we were not required to have a conscious understanding of complex systems.
What creates great innovation in the social arena?
It starts with you taking action.
Have some real sense of control over our lives.
Sophie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, absolute pleasure. Well, I'd like to start off probably looking at City Year, if that's okay.
That's
because
fine.
In the topic of change, that startup phase and how you actually moved it from zero income up to several £1 million income a year. How did you do that? What was necessary in order to create that change?
Lots of factors. I mean, lots of different people and stakeholders, I think, coming together. So I think there's a bit of a myth in our sector, the charity sector, around the sort of one dynamic founder that pulls, that is responsible. And that wasn't really my experience. I mean, yes, I was the leader, but if we hadn't have had a brilliant team of staff, a brilliant team of funders and supporters and young people who then stepped up to do the programme, particularly the first cohort who took a punt on us, then none of it would have happened. So I think a lot of that change was really the force of will of that collective coming together around a particular vision and making something happen, and then trying to work out how best to replicate that year on year. So I was there for 8 years. So we started with nothing, raised the money, demonstrated it in London, grew it in London, and then moved to the West Midlands and Greater Manchester. So there were a number of sort of changes going on. I mean, we were in continual change, I suppose, the whole way through. And the programme itself is about the change that you can make in young people's lives through service, social action in support of children. So it was entirely about change. The whole thing was about change. Yeah. The whole way through.
And I really hear what you say there as well about not being a central, forceful leader who's like, come on, let's... But having worked with you, one of the things I think you did very well was bring together that staff team, bring together the funders, the trustees and the young people and got them working in a particular direction. That seems important to me. How did you do that? How did you create that collaboration?
I suppose it is about this sort of central vision that you've got to have a collective sense of this is what we want to achieve, and this is the urgency. One of my previous bosses, Shax Ghosh, who used to run Crisis, and I worked for at the Private Equity Foundation, used to always say, what's the crisis? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And try and coalesce everybody around that. She was talking about that in the context of fundraising, and of course that's really important. But actually, when you're trying to galvanise volunteers and other people to come together, you do need that sense of urgency around children are not achieving at school. Young people don't know what they're going to do when they leave school or university. That's a crisis that we've got an answer to, and there's a real sense of urgency about doing something to address that in as great a way as we possibly can. So I think keeping true to that vision, we also had a plan for 2020 that pretty much all our young people could recite. It really was quite a good, having that sort of guide star was really helpful for everybody to then come behind and sort of drive everybody towards. But I suppose it was also about having high standards and expectations of people. People tend to rise to your expectations. So if you expect excellence, that usually tends to happen, and people want to meet that expectation. So, and I was also very picky about the staff we hired as well. I was, particularly in the early days, wanted to make sure I met everybody who came for interviews. We did a lot of interviews. A lot of it was around fit, around attitude. Are people really up for this, and are they going to work in the same way that we want to work, in terms of working fast, working in a business-like way, trying to make this happen quickly, because that wasn't for everybody. So I was very lucky that, and you worked with a lot of them. We had a really core team of very smart, very committed people,
yes,
who most of whom were with me for the whole 8 years, which was amazing.
It was incredible, and there were some phenomenal people there, and I think you should be very proud of that,
Yeah.
as I know you are. How did you do that, though? Because you said I was in the interviews, and I looked for fit, attitude, I heard motivation as well. But if someone was trying to emulate that, how would they do that? Because it worked.
How did I do that? I suppose I was just... Some of it is instinct. You sort of know if you can work, you do know if you can work with someone or you can't. And I suppose it's about having clarity in your own mind and with your team around, this is what we expect, these are the standards we expect, and these are the behaviours we expect. And we spent a lot of time working with you and your team on the sort of what does it really look like in terms of the behaviour and culture of the organisation at its absolute best, and then looking in an interview process at who can match that, both in terms of the interaction you get and then using examples to test people. So I suppose we did a lot of scenarios in interviews with people to sort of test how they would deal with particular issues. So a lot of our work was very interpersonal. We were recruiting all the time because we were recruiting young people. That in itself was a real responsibility. Recruiting schools as well. We also were having to assess whether a school was the right fit for us. So much of it was about culture and style. And so I suppose you got used to understanding and knowing quite quickly what was the right fit or not. The challenge you then have is then communicating that further down the chain as you grow as an organisation, because to begin with, we were a small group and you end up with a bit of a shorthand between you. But as you grew, we were at 60 staff by the time I left. You can't be in every interview.
Yes.
So it was about trying to make sure that you had a staff culture that was as codified as possible to help other people be part of that and help to replicate it as we got bigger. And I think we pretty much did that.
I agree.
Across all
definitely.
3 sites. So,
and you mentioned the coalescing around a crisis, around a mission, and getting that clear. Again, how did you define that? How did you sell it? Because you have a sense of urgency, and as I talked to you about quite a few different social issues, I think you could motivate me around them. But to take a whole organisation in that direction, what was your process, or what was your thinking in order to get that clarity?
Well, I suppose we had a model that we inherited from the US, and then we looked at how we could apply that model of young people volunteering in schools to the challenges that there are in our country. And there were 2 challenges. One was young people not knowing or having the skills they need to go into the workplace or for their future. Even young people who are graduating with great degrees are very often doing that with a lot of debt behind them, but also just really not knowing what to do next. And the world is quite a confusing place. So it's sort of, how do we tackle that problem, and how do we use the sort of the gift that they can give of their time and their service to both upskill them, but also help them to make that very human connection with children who need their attention, time, mentoring, support, and through that help those young people to work out who they are, what they're good at, how they can grow, and then where they can move on to next. And the other piece we brought into that was working with corporate partners to help them provide their own support for those young people giving their service to children. So we would offer a mentor from business to all our young people participating on the programme, but we'd also help them with work shadowing, work placements, access to, I mean, even just access to going to an event at Canary, or building in Canary Wharf, that sort of thing. So actually, the first time you go for an interview with a business, it's not the first time you've been in an office like that, can be in itself transformational. So I felt like there was a social mobility mission at the heart of all of the things we were doing. And we have a real problem with social mobility in the UK. So we were taking a tried and tested version of Sit Here from the States and applying that to the social mobility problem.
Yes.
And so we were having to communicate that problem to all of the stakeholders involved in our organisation to help galvanise them to want to make a difference to that. But we had a really good tool to do that. I suppose that's the thing, you need the crisis and then you need the tool, and the tool can motivate people because they feel like they can get behind it and see, okay, that's how I can make that change. And then we were really hot on measuring impact as well. So it wasn't just, oh, it's a really nice thing and it's quite fluffy and you've given your service. It was, how many hours have you spent with children? How are their levels improving? How are those young people rating their confidence? We had a measure around confidence in speaking to figures in authority.
Okay.
That absolutely rocketed. It was something like 9% at the start of the year. This is young people felt confident talking to people in authority, and by the end of the year it was 75%. Because they'd been in a school. So they were talking to teachers, head teachers, they were having to advocate, negotiate on behalf of the after school club they were running or the breakfast club they were sorting out. They were having to do that day in, day out. So they were suddenly able to do that, which is an amazing thing for them to then go into the workplace.
Yes.
So those sorts of things we were really hot on looking at. Our own internal measures, but also having external evaluation to really validate what we were doing so we knew what worked and how we could improve on it. Which I was also really proud about, and we would do a biannual breakfast for all of our supporters and present to them a big slide deck of, these are all the measures, this is what we've done, this is what didn't work, this is what we're adjusting, and bring them in to the family to sort of help them understand and see what it was we were thinking about. So hopefully that also, and that, you know, our retention of donors was very strong. There were a lot of donors who funded us to begin with, based on the track record from the States, but then stayed with us for those 8 years because of what we were doing and because they were part of that journey with us.
Wow. I want to come back to evaluation a little bit more in a moment, if I may. But first of all, you mentioned corporate partners several times in that conversation. What role do you think business has in the area of social change and activism? I mean, what part do you think they can play in the years ahead?
Oh, lots. And I think there's an increasing expectation on the part of young people going into businesses, asking them, what do you do for social good? How responsible are you? And that is starting to change behaviour. I think there's a real opportunity for companies to think about and support the role that their staff can play in the community. And I mean, of course, lots of them do that already, but that, you know, can always go further. And one of the things I'm doing now is running a program called Step on Board, which is a board placement program, and we work with a range of organisations like Google and Barclays and EY and others to help them train up their staff to think about becoming a charity trustee, help them understand what's involved, and then work with them to create their board ready CV and place them with a charity or match them, help them to apply. Obviously they've got to be right for it. And that's a very powerful way of getting new types of people onto charity boards and involved in civil society, which is really important. But there's a whole range of other things that businesses need to and will be doing. Trustees Unlimited is a B Corp. We're part of the B Corp movement in the UK. So one of the B Corp movement is about businesses with a purpose that want to be responsible in social and environmental areas. And I think the B Corp movement here is just going to grow. And I think there's going to be an increasing overlap between charities and business and social enterprise, and that whole world is going to merge a lot more. Charities are often businesses themselves anyway,
Yes.
having to run trading arms. They are run like businesses. I really tried running a charity to run it like a business as much as I could. The thing that drove me slightly nuts with that was fundraising, and the fact that fundraising is quite a fickle environment. It's not based on sales to customers. And I wish, we could have had more of that. But we built up the side of the business we could sell, which was selling to schools. We did, and about 30% of our income was through school sales. So schools buying in our product because they valued it as something that they needed in their schools. And we had a lot of repeat customers. So, where they can be commercial, they should be trying to be as efficient as possible. But there's always a need for that philanthropic investment so that you can do things that the market doesn't allow you to do.
Yes.
So there still needs to be that blurring across the different sectors.
And do you think, because some companies are very good in this area, but some it still is philanthropic, is still very much about, here, have some money, do something good with it.
Yeah.
And I don't really understand quite what you're doing with it, but it sounds cool.
Yes.
Where do you think that's going? Because I personally, to be very leading, I personally see there are opportunities for businesses to use their skills in much more, to have much more direct social impact.
Absolutely. I think there's a huge potential for skills-based volunteering rather than going and doing the traditional painting a wall.
Yeah.
And there is still a bit too much of the painting a wall and team-based, let's go and do something nice. And I think sometimes there can be a bit of fear of, oh no, that's not my world, what would I have to offer? But actually there's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot of skills that are so transferable that charities are crying out for at trustee level, but also at executive level, to support the staff on a project basis. Or I suppose the challenge that you have is that understanding both ways of the pressures that you have. So I think charities don't necessarily always understand quite how busy people in business are, and the different competing pressures they've got. And then business people don't quite understand that to engage volunteers takes quite a lot of work. And my mantra always used to be, volunteering is not free. If you want, we'd often get approaches from people who'd want to come and spend their away day problem solving for us or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And actually that takes a lot of work to set up. And that I think we'd also get businesses not really realising that just because we worked in a charity didn't mean we weren't professional. So they'd sort of come thinking that the bar was a lot lower than it actually was. So I think there's a sort of need for that understanding on both sides so that you meet in the middle rather than talk across each other.
And how's that achieved? Because obviously with the role you now have at Trustees Unlimited, and Step on Board to a large degree as well, you're at the centre of that now. How do you actually achieve that in a way that is useful to a charity? Because I agree with you. Having run Kick-Ass, there were all sorts of skills I wanted, but I couldn't get them in big enough dollops to make them useful. If you're employing a member of staff, you often consider that they're not going to be active for at least 6 months, really. Yeah. And we're expecting this person to come in 27 minutes and make a change.
Yes, and also lots of people coming to offer you advice, and you're like, I just need someone to come and do it.
Yes.
Don't tell me what to do. I know what needs doing. I just need someone there to do it. So I think there's no silver bullet with this stuff. So I think the mission I have now with Trustees Unlimited and Step on Board is to try and get a greater volume of people understanding what being a trustee involves and getting involved in joining charity boards. There's 160,000 charities in England and Wales. There's enough to go round, and we need to get a greater volume of people coming through to step onto those boards at all levels. So it's not just the Save the Children's, it's the small local community charities and everything in between. And I think the more people get involved in those, perhaps more at the grassroots level, actually, they will have a greater understanding of what it takes to run a charity. But equally, there's also, from the sort of CSR perspective, a greater need for them to help with that brokerage and for that to help their staff understand the environment that charities are operating in and what it is they need. But it's multi-layered.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, I want to be a little bit provocative here now.
Okay.
And just to say that my experience, I mean, obviously I ran Kick-Ass for about 10 years, and I had a board of trustees, and I recruited pretty much all of those trustees. I mentioned this to you earlier. And periodically we had a functioning board, but most of the time there was really interesting stuff going on. Now, that I take responsibility for that as an entrepreneur as well, that I'm sure I wasn't easy to work with as the founder and leader and chief exec of the organisation, and then people coming into that space. But my experience across the sector is that there aren't a huge number of really functional trustee boards that I've had the pleasure of engaging with. That might be because I'm called in when they're not working, so maybe I've got a skewed view. But what's your thoughts on that? If these are the boards that effectively are creating the organisations that are going to create some of the social change that we have in the future, how can it work?
I think a lot of it is down, because of the structure we have, I think a lot of it is down to the chair. So if you've got a good chair, everything will flow out of that, and vice versa. And that chair-CEO relationship is really important in terms of making sure that there's clarity about where the organisation is going strategically. And then it's about the chair facilitating diversity of thought and input onto a board rather than creating cliques, which can often happen. And that often doesn't happen. So I had a brilliant stat the other day. 1 in 12 trustees is called John or David, which gives you an example of how undiverse charity boards are. And actually, having robust conversations at trustee board level is fine. That is a good thing. There should be robust debate, and I think that does come from having people with lots of different backgrounds and lived experience around that board table being enabled to have a discussion, and then the skill is in chairing that so that everybody has had their input, but that there's a resolved way forward, and that then collectively you agree with that way forward. I think, unfortunately, there's too much groupthink. There's too many people who are like-minded and from the same backgrounds all sitting around a table together. That doesn't help to facilitate that. There's also an unhelpful approach that is one of the things Step on Board is set up to try and challenge, which is people from brilliant business backgrounds taking their business hat off when they enter the boardroom and thinking, now I've got my charity hat on, when actually they need their business hat on. So there's that sort of psychology of, no, actually we want your business skills, we want you to be thinking like that and to be looking and reviewing the accounts in a forensic way and helping to challenge the executive in a supportive way, but in a robust way. And that there are lots of similarities once you've got your head around the differences. There are also lots of similarities. So there's lots of different elements to that, but I think diversity that is allowed to come forward and have a powerful input into the boardroom is at the heart of some of that.
Okay. And what about working with the exec team? You mentioned that supportive type environment. Are you a fan of key execs being almost like an equal part of the decision-making board, or do you see trustees as a separate external board?
I think there's a sort of I really want to look into this a little bit when I have some time. The idea of
you are new in post. I will be very fair to you on that.
The idea of unitary boards, so that like in business you have execs and non-execs. Why that's not the case in the charity sector, and I think there are some charities that have unitary boards like that. I think it's important that I know that the trustees entrust the running of the organisation to the staff if the charity's big enough, but actually those staff, particularly the exec, have a really important trusted role, and they should have that liability as well around the boardroom table, but also that voice,
Yes.
rather than having to sort of go with a please can I do this, and that can sometimes lead to a really unhelpful dynamic of having to sort of play power games outside the boardroom to get what you want inside the boardroom, which isn't healthy. You should just all be having that discussion. So I do wonder whether the structures need adjusting in order to facilitate that. And it is something I've been meaning to look at for ages. Actually, I'm quite interested in exploring.
Well, you need a social cause now, because
I do,
all the time I've known you, you've had some sort of cause that you've been taking on. So I think that might be an appropriate one. I think it's important because looking at your career, I do see that one of your strengths is collaboration, and that unitary board, that collaboration skill seems to be a really important part of how things work.
Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you do the collaboration stuff and not let your ego get in the way that a lot of people do? I mean, obviously, I know we've had some interesting conversations from time to time, but how do you do that and bring people together and diverse thought together? It seems like a really important part of the change process to me.
It really is. I think it's about, I suppose it's different levels, isn't it? It's people feeling that, and so much of this is down to feeling as much as your head. It's the heart as well, feeling that they own a process, so that you're all in it together and you are all working towards the same mission and you have a stake in contributing towards that. But that you will be supported in testing stuff out rather than penalised for it. Because not everything works when you're going through a change process. You've got to test some stuff out. And, not everything worked with City Year. Across 8 years, we had to test things and stop and start, and not every appointment worked, and not every school partnership worked. But I think the most important thing is sort of going in with a learning frame of mind, so that you can collectively then take stock and review why actually you decided to withdraw from that school partnership, or why this funder decided to not fund you, or whatever it is, but doing that in a team-based way. So I suppose my whole approach has always been doing things as a team, be that as a team of young people in a school, or a team of our staff, or a team with a corporate, actually, getting to really know. I think it's also particularly with funders, it's been getting to understand their motivation for being involved, and it's one of the privileges of that job and also this job now, because we've got a lot of corporate partners supporting the Stuff on Board programmes. Why do they want to be involved?
Yes.
What is their motivation? What's their driver? Because once you understand that, you can work together much more effectively to meet that driver while also meeting the objective that you have. And then you're pushing at an open door.
Okay, so if I understand that correctly, because in the back of my mind was also this vision and urgency in creating the crisis that you were talking about earlier, which potentially is at odds with then going, oh, let's look at what you want. But it seems to be that you're talking much more about, we've got this direction, everyone needs to be aligned to that direction.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But also everyone's got their own stuff, their reasons for running alongside us or with us.
Yeah.
You've checked up front that they are the right person. They're broadly focused in the right direction.
Yes.
But still recognising that they have individual objectives around that.
Everybody's got a different motivation or reason to care about your cause, I suppose, if that's a better way of putting it. There's sort of like the higher purpose, but everybody comes to that higher purpose through a series of routes, and is motivated to stay focused on that higher purpose because they've got a particular motivator behind them, be that a personal driver or be it a target, an internal corporate target or whatever. You have to understand what is the route to unlock their driver to your higher purpose, I suppose, is my is my point. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And is that the difference that lets go of the ego?
I think so, because then, I think so. Yeah, I mean, there will always be some people who you just have to flatter their ego and make them feel like they're number one, and
Yes.
you just have to accept that that is life. But most people, if you can unlock that higher motivation, they'll be with you. And also, if you make it fun to work with you as well, they've got to, there's actually sort of basic stuff like that. Give them good coffee in the office. Be nice to them. Be responsive, be easy to work with, give them the results that they need, and particularly thinking about funders, I suppose, in terms of give them what they need, give them a bit more than what they need, help them look good to their superiors, but also help them feel good about being part of your mission. There's a whole load of things you can do along the side to get them to come alongside you that aren't that hard. And make it a whole lot easier to get stuff done.
And give you multiple routes to get to the same point.
Exactly. Yeah.
I really like that. And I did say I'd come back to evaluation.
Oh, yes.
As well. And again, now that you've got the chief exec hat for Trustees Unlimited, again, it seems appropriate to almost ask that question. How do you do evaluation? I was hearing a lot of creativity in what you were talking about before, and not necessarily just looking at the normal metrics, but what could we be evaluating here? But how do you think it works? And I have an agenda within this, in that I think a huge number of charities are hugely ineffective, and I've become really cynical since I left Kick-Ass.
Well, I think there's, if you're evaluating charities, it's different, or evaluating a business, I suppose, but there's the counting piece, which is counting the numbers. But I think the thing that's quite interesting then is to explore what's behind those numbers. So you need the quant, but you need the qual, which is really understanding why is that number happening, and what's the story behind that to help you understand the impact you're making, or the change you need to make to adjust that result. And so we would always do both, and then we would always, this is from a CiTIA perspective, we'd always have an external view where we could afford it, and we were lucky that a couple of funders paid for us to have external evaluations over the years that gave you that sort of different picture. And the best evaluations were the formative ones, where they worked with you and you start, as you went through, you were shaping how you were thinking about evolving the programme. We had a great evaluation that Renacy did with us that helped us to really think about the structure of the staff structure in the schools, and we changed the whole staff structure in schools because of that evaluation, which was totally the right thing to do. Their evaluation confirmed what we were thinking, but it was having that external input that gave us the confidence to go forward and make that change. It cost us quite a lot of money, so we needed that external viewpoint. But their evaluation was a much more qualitative rather than quantitative one, because they went and observed what was actually happening, which I think is really important.
That is really important. I also think it's really significant what I'm hearing here, because as we look at social change, part of my question behind this is, how does social change actually happen? How do we know it's actually changed? And I'm hearing that what you're talking about in terms of evaluation is having the evaluation linked to the vision.
Yes.
Not so much to the funds. Now, obviously, you still have to have that linkage there, but I've spoken to a lot of people over the years where it's about evaluating it to get more funding, rather than what I'm hearing and what you're saying is the evaluation helped us to make a better product. Potentially
that was then funded. I suppose that was the difference that around CiTIA compared to some charities, which was we had a model and we were trying to draw funding into it, rather than other charities I've worked in, you were going after the funding and creating the product to meet the funding sometimes, or you're having to adapt your product to meet the funding. Now, sometimes that is just what you have to do to be able to keep your organisation going and to do the work that you know is valuable. But we were trying to do something different, which was to try and pull in money against something we knew worked and that we were continually evaluating, and we were trying to create fellow travellers of our funders who would then we would report back to on the evaluation of our product rather than their stream of funding.
Yes.
We would of course report back to them on their stream of funding, you know, in their quarterly reports and what have you. But I think the thing that really got the key decision makers motivated to keep funding us was the breakfast, the dinners, the coming to see it in the school, that macro piece, and seeing at a macro level the impact that we were making. That's what I believe anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a...
But it is hard. The funding environment isn't really set up to enable you to do that, and we were able to buck that trend. But it is a hard thing to do. And it was getting increasingly difficult to do because we weren't new and exciting after 8 years. So it was tougher.
Okay, and I think that's an important point, isn't it? As we look at how does social change actually happen, and what is it that create that impact? As I said earlier, I know you've done a lot of lobbying of governments, and you've normally had some sort of cause that you're championing, and I've seen you many times create real long-lasting change as a result of that. What do you think are those qualities that actually enable social change to take place?
Do you mean in the lobbying sort of political change context?
If you're willing to go there, I'd very much be interested in your thoughts there. I mean, how do we change things? You know, if we're not satisfied with the status quo now, if we're not happy with where things are, what are those things from your observations that seem to make a difference?
Well, I suppose you need to decide where you're going to make the change. So you can make change at a political level. Of course, you know, that right now is quite an interesting space to be in, let's put it that way. Or you can decide you're going to do it on a practical level. So I started my career thinking I wanted to change the world. I've always cheesily thought I wanted to change the world, and I thought politics was the way to do it. I still believe politics does change the world. It certainly changes the world, but
not always in the right direction.
No. And you know, I decided that my contribution was better made in a sort of more practical charity sector space. I'm more of a sort of doer, and I found politics quite frustrating and quite slow. Having said that, all of my roles up to now have had a sort of advocacy piece to them, because I still think that changing the levers of power and structures is really important to also try and do in tandem with that practical social change at an individual level. You want system change as well. How do you create social change? I think, well, it does still come back to what is your crisis? What are you trying to change? Yeah. What's your vision? And then what are you going to do either systemically or practically to make that happen? And who is going to be alongside you? It's that, you know, thoughtful group of committed citizens.
Yes.
Margaret Mead quote, which is really important. You need some followers if you're going to lead some change. And so who's going to be alongside you to do that in a practical way? What is it that you're trying to address? So at the moment I'm the chair of Little Village, which is a baby bank. Our founder Sophia was on a maternity leave for one of her 3 babies, and decided that she wanted to do something about the amount of baby kit that you get and what you do with it. So she's created a baby bank that passes on baby kit to families that need it, who can't afford it. The really exciting bit about that is not just the kit, but the connections that are then made between the volunteers who donate their kit and help to sort it out and the families that need it. And the story that we can then tell about child poverty. So then it comes back up to the advocacy piece.
Yes.
And she's done incredibly well at getting a lot of coverage. There was a Dispatches programme a couple of weeks ago, Women's Hour last week, The Observer on Sunday. So, you know, lots of stuff. It's really live because baby banks are quite a new phenomenon in this country. It's quite heartrending to think that there are children sleeping on sofa cushions on the floor, not having safe cots, all that sort of, not having the right clothes, all of that sort of stuff. It's really depressing. And 1 in 5 of the families we see are in work, so it's not even extreme. It's people who are working who can't afford stuff for their children. But the bigger lever pulling piece that we have for Little Village is the raising awareness of child poverty and trying to make a change at that level, while also alleviating on a practical day-to-day level the very real need that families have across London for this stuff. So I would say it's the practical side of things helps you to do the advocacy piece because you've got the evidence from the practical piece. So it was a very long-winded way of getting to that point. You have the credibility and the evidence that you need through those stories, and it is very often stories. You can have them. You can have loads of numbers, but actually we respond to stories.
Yes.
Which is why we've ended up with so many bits of coverage recently, because the stories are so powerful, and it's those that are then starting to get attention. But then you really need a very powerful, very targeted, specific way of trying to look at what levers need to be pulled to make a change at government level. And that's where it gets tricky, particularly in the current climate, to get enough attention to make that happen. And my experience on doing that is being tenacious and being a pain.
Yes.
Can often get you quite a long way. But also, if you've got that credibility behind you, that makes a really big difference.
I think that's really useful. You layering those bits out, that being practical, coming up with some of the solutions as well as that's probably one of the bits that's missing from social action.
Yeah,
it's that
it's
going
not just
against
shouting,
something, but going towards something.
Exactly.
I'm hearing that several times in what you're saying. The vision, the urgency, but something practical there that we can rally behind.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of being focused on, right, it's this particular thing. So when I was at Citia, it was, you need to change the law around young people giving a full-time year of service, because at the moment they're counted as NEETs, not in education, employment and training, but yet they're doing something really valuable for themselves and society. That's crazy. It's a small change.
Yes.
And because it was a small change, we managed to get attention. So it's about picking off the pieces that you think can be changed. And also, if you have a bigger cause, obviously influencing the broader political conversation, but piece by piece, making things change. When I was at the Foyer Federation working on youth homelessness, it was the 16-hour housing benefit rule that we were really focusing on, and again creating stories behind to try and get that changed. So yeah.
Thank you. No, I think that's
right.
really useful, really useful. Can you tell us, you mentioned B Corp movement earlier. We've talked about similar developments potentially, the teal movements around businesses and these sort of things to some extent, and changes and movements. What's your understanding of the B Corp movement, and where do you think it's going?
So it's come across from the States, but it's really gathering pace in the UK, and it's a way for businesses to certify that they are businesses with a social or environmental responsible purpose, and you get certified by B Corp, and then you can talk about your commitment to that as a B Corp. So it's a growing movement.
Yes.
And it's a fairly rigorous certification process. So it's not something that you just, a logo you just stick on your website. So it's a really good way of signalling that commitment, and hopefully will then become a sort of badge of honour, really, if you're trying to attract people to apply to work for you or for contracts or that sort of thing, to show actually no, we are serious about our social purpose or being an impact driven organisation, and this is why, and that's what B Corp does for us. So having joined Trustees Unlimited, which is a founding B Corp in the UK, I'm quite excited about getting to know them a bit more and working out what else we can do to sort of help grow that movement and be part of it, because I think it's got real potential to go further.
I think so too. I think there's something really wonderful in any sort of movements that's creating some of these changes. One of the things Giles Gibbons reflected on, I suppose, during the podcast that we had with him from Good Business, was he was questioning whether a certification like that there's a danger that when somebody's got it, they go, right, we've got that. A little bit like Investors in People or something like that. And he was saying, even though he's heavily involved in the Sustainable Restaurants Association, which has a certification process. So I'm not against certification and that sort of thing. But do you think there's a danger that it's the next thing that people create the badge, or what's the energy that stops that?
I think that. Yeah, I mean, it slightly segues me into thinking about all the thinking we did when we created Generation Change, which is a group of youth social action organisations that came together to want to prove and demonstrate the power of youth social action through sort of defining it and defining what high quality looked like. And we had a lot of kickback, quite rightly, from the sector around, well, we don't need a tick box investors in people type certification for it. And what we've ended up with is what we've called an impact accelerator. We work with Dartington Social Research Unit to deliver, and it is very much about looking at how you can be a continual learning organisation, or your programme, because some of them are programmes of a bigger organisation. So it is a sort of continual improvement programme, and the Impact Accelerator is about that, rather than about you've fulfilled all these things we've seen, you've got these policies, right, you're fine. It's much more about a continual commitment to raising the tide of high quality youth social action, and demonstrating that you're committed to what we've defined as double benefit youth social action. So the young person doing the giving back also benefits alongside the cause that they're benefiting, which is something that came out of actually the city year ethos of young people serving kids in schools. So I'm quite proud of what we did with Generation Change, and I suppose that's one of the things that makes me excited about talking to B Corp about how we can use some of maybe the lessons from that. You know, I'm sure they've got plenty of knowledge and expertise themselves, but it'd be interesting to have that conversation about how they think about it, and how it can be a sort of continually evolving movement, rather than just you've got your certification, therefore you are a good organisation, because we all know that that's never going to be enough. It is always about a continual conversation.
Yes, and I certainly don't want to be on the outside saying, "Oh, this could never," because I think anything that moves forward and gets, it also groups together. I mean, that's one of the things I always loved about Generation Change, was bringing together like-minded people, and the benefits that could be got as people talk to other people. I was at one of the forum meetings for the chief execs, I remember, and just thinking there are some of the most powerful people in this sector here, working together, learning from each other, and acceleration is probably the right word to put in on.
Yeah, and it was brilliant, because it was it hadn't happened before. There was a bit of resistance, shall we say, from some quarters about it to begin with. But one of the best bits of founding being a co-founder of Generation Change, was the conversations that we had in the early days, working out what we were going to do, and it was so much fun. But also, just being a chief exec of a charity is quite a lonely job. So all of us coming together and having those conversations, I think we all got so much out of that piece. And it meant that we had a stronger organisation moving forward, and continue to do, because I'm still on the board of Generation Change, because we've been through that together, and we've been through that thinking process. So I'm really proud of what we've managed to achieve with that, sort of against the odds, on top of our day jobs.
Yes.
Because we care. I suppose it comes back again to that bigger mission of, because we really cared about high quality on behalf of young people. And yes, it's a bit removed from the sort of day-to-day delivery, but actually it's all about the day-to-day delivery, and the quality and standard that those young people get comes from the vision you set, and everything that flows through as a result of that.
I think there's some lovely learning there, potentially, in the new role at Trustees Unlimited as well, of coming together in that way, and how that can really work as in a powerful way.
Yeah.
I'd like to just, as we're approaching the end of our conversation, get a bit more personal.
Okay.
And I think over the years that I've known you, 'cause our relationship goes back
A long
to
time,
to back those days with Foyer Federation
Yes.
when we were working together with Richard Branson.
Oh yeah.
Let's not go there right now. that's at least 3 more podcasts. But if we think back to those 8 years City Year, how do you think you've grown? How do you think your own personal transformation, if we think about that, what's changed and what created that change, assuming it's positive? I personally believe it is. But,
Well, I mean, I think I knew it was going to be challenging and quite lonely, as I said, being a chief exec, but you don't know it until you do it. And I remember in the early days thinking, oh, people are actually looking to me to make a decision, and having to really get into that mode. And then it was quite hard to get out of that mode, particularly at home, which is quite challenging in itself. And then also never having done quite as much public speaking as I did, particularly in the early days, partly because of the nature of the organisation. I was a lot more involved in the delivery in the first few years, understandably. So it was a lot of public speaking to the young people as well. But it was just being that front person was quite a switch up. And that calls on particular resources. But I think, there's a huge amount it takes out of you personally, but that you get out of it personally, working out how to run the business, all these sort of taking people with you, who your staff are, who your loyal people are, that you can grow. You grow together, really, and you go through a lot of experiences together. But we were really deliberate about trying to skill ourselves up, I think, which is why we worked with you to help train our staff team up in coaching, helping us to be thoughtful about how we were going to integrate that across the organisation and give ourselves the tools we needed to help develop our team and ourselves. I think you've always got to be thoughtful about that type of thing, and you need to continually be learning and reflecting and drawing on support from wherever you can get it. So I was lucky to have a network from our supporters that I could go to for particular specialist advice, but also general advice. So as well as the support we had from you, I've had a pro bono coach from one of our supporters, who actually I still work with now, having moved on, which is amazing, an amazing privilege to have that. I don't think you ever stop learning. You learn how to have difficult conversations, you learn how to code switch in different meetings, how you deal with a head teacher. Negotiation is quite different to how you pitch to a private equity firm for funding, to how you deal with a young person who's maybe crossed the line and needs to think about having a second or third chance, and what judgment call you make. And you were making all of those code switches during the course of a day. It's one of the things I loved about it, but it was also one of the challenges of that sort of role, is you are just switching all the time.
So how do you do that? How do you prepare yourself for that, I suppose? Because one of the constants in the work that we do, and most people are experiencing out in the world, is that change is happening all the time. How do you become more resilient to that? How do you? I mean, I'm hearing in what you're saying very much a growth mindset and embracing the learning and recognizing that there is going to be learning and there are opportunities for learning, and that thinking like that makes a difference. Is what I heard in what you said.
Yes.
But how do you become resilient, or how do you take on that mindset?
The mindset piece, I don't know how you take it on particularly. I mean, I suppose mine sort of emerged, but it definitely, the work we did with you definitely helped in terms of the discussion about being at cause, not effect, and taking responsibility for what you were doing, how you were coming across, being thoughtful about all of those pieces. Being resilient, I think a lot of it is about a support network, and knowing who you go and talk to for advice and support on particular issues, be that going home and talking to people at home, partner, etc., family about it and sort of sounding off, or it's which member of staff is my trusted lieutenant on this particular issue that I can call in to sound them out. And I was really lucky that I had a group of people that I could go to on different issues and say, I knew I could go to my strategy director for particular knotty thinking problems, but he wasn't the person to go to on interpersonal issues. But my HR director really was. So, that it's just having those people around you. So that, again, it's a team-based approach. It's not, sometimes you do have to make the call on your own, and sometimes they're only giving you advice, or sometimes it's not even appropriate to go to them. But a lot of the time, you're collectively working on a problem, you're coming up with that solution together, and then you own that solution and that decision. And that's quite powerful as well. That's quite nice, and you're going through it together. And then hopefully you're also reflecting on it.
Yes.
And what we also used to do is refer back to particular experiences, particularly in terms of running the programme or a school partnership or whatever. There were so many times where we'd say, yes, but what about that example? We did this in this context with that work here. And you're always sort of using that institutional memory to help you with that particular example.
Wonderful. So just to almost, we're looking into the future. One of the conversations we were having a moment ago was about how interesting times are, particularly around politics at the moment, and in various different areas. What do you think is going to be different in 5 years' time? What are the opportunities? What are the threats that are happening right now with all the change that's going on?
I think the nature of work is going to be different. And one of the things I'm quite excited about with this new job is that I'm working part-time and working flexibly. And I think that is going to increase, and that need for people to have more flexibility to balance their lives is really important. It's obviously important for the stage I'm at with two small people to look after, but actually it shouldn't just be about working mums that have that. It should be about everybody needing that flexibility to fit in the whole of their lives. Actually, one of the reasons I want that flexibility is because I'm on 3 trustee boards, and that's really important to me.
Yes.
But it also helps my job. But it's really important to have that as part of my life. So I think that nature of work, the fact that we will be remote working in lots of different ways, and technology can enable that, is going to be a big growing theme in the next few years. And so I'm quite excited about responding to that and thinking about how we can, as a business, respond to that.
Yes.
In terms of the social sector, we are a much more divided country than we were a few years ago, unfortunately. I don't think, whatever the outcome of the political situation we're in, I don't think that's going to it's going to take a long time for that to heal.
Yes.
And civil society has a really, really important role in stepping up and taking on some of that healing. And the trustee piece of that is important, because we need people from all walks of life helping to be leaders of social organisations. So that's my social mission, actually, is people from diverse ranges, walks of life, lived experience, etc., diverse backgrounds coming in to be leaders of the social sector. We need it. We need their experience. We need their contribution. We need their thinking. And so my mission is to try and find different ways to help draw people in, consider it, and to be part of it.
Superb. So if someone's listening to this or watching this and they're going, you know what, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of the healing. What can I do? I'd quite like to be a trustee. Mm-hmm. Where should they go?
They can visit our website, trusteesunlimited.co.uk. You can register to be a trustee on there, look at our current opportunities. If you're interested in Step on Board, you can get in touch with me. You can find me quite easily on Twitter and LinkedIn, or from our website. There's also lots of other places where you can look to be a trustee. So NCVO, where we are now, and it's one of the owners of Trustees Unlimited, has trustee banks, so that's for smaller charities as well. So there's lots of places that you can look for trustee vacancies, but obviously register with us.
Yes.
Very important. Come to us.
Perfect. Okay, Sophie, thank you so much for your time. It's gorgeous to see you again. And
Likewise.
Really appreciate just tapping into your brain once more. Thank you for your time. Really value everything you've had to say, and look forward to the adventure ahead.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
I'm pleased. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this 91 Untold Change Project podcast. I'm Neil Armand. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe. You can also keep in touch with our adventures on social or at 91untold.com. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to the adventures ahead.